Hello, my name is Nathan Taylor, otherwise known as Sockmatician, and this is a tutorial to accompany the Sockmatician's Double Knitted Brioche ebook. This particular video shows how to work the two-colour alternating invisible cast-on worked in the round. Now the process of doing this is actually no different from working backwards and forwards. The actual casting on is exactly the same, but because this cast-on does tend to be a little bit unstable, it is just loops cast on around the needle until you've worked into it. A little bit of extra help is often needed for making sure that you can work in the round safely. Obviously, when you're working in the round, you need to be able to fold your cast-on stitches back around on top of each other so you can start working on the place where you started your cast-on, and that's not always possible without losing a lot of your stitches. The reason for that is if you're using a circular needle, you'll need to slide the stitches onto the cable of the needle, and the cable doesn't keep the stitches under the same tension as the needle does, so things can go a little bit astray there. So I find it's much better idea to take two or more double pointed needles. I'm just going to use two today, and start casting them on there. Make sure obviously they're the same size as your working needle for the project, and cast on half the amount of stitches that you need onto the first of your DPNs. And you can see I've done that already. I've got my slip knot here, the two loops of my slip knot, which we're going to ignore. We're going to drop those off the end of the needle before we work the first actual pair of stitches, and I've cast on 10 pairs of stitches there. Now then, keeping the two yarns in their positions over the thumb and index finger, gently pinch the DPN with your left index finger and thumb. You can just tug on the yarns there if necessary to keep them under tension there, at the point where the two yarns meet underneath that last stitch cast on, so pinch just there. Then your right hand is free and you can pick up the second DPN at that point. Hold the two DPNs in your right hand, pinching the two together and letting them cross at the point where the yarns meet under that last stitch cast on. So that means reaching around and holding them there like that. So I've got my new working needle picking up where the old working needle left off. Now, using the second DPN as the working needle, you can repeat steps 6 to 9 of the casting on process for working flat, of course, casting all subsequent pairs of stitches onto the second DPN. So that looks like a bit tricky to show this on the camera, but I'm not really worried about what the mechanics are. I just want to show you how it works, holding everything in position. Once I've got my first pair of stitches cast on, you can see I can let go of that old needle there and just carry on casting on the stitches as I need to. It's 3 there, 4, 5, I want to get to 10, 6, 7, 8. This is not the neatest job, of course. I'm trying to keep it on camera rather than do it as accurately as I normally would like to. 9 and 10. So now I've got 10 pairs of stitches cast on to each of my needles here, and they're joined here at this hinge point like that. As per the instructions for working flat, once you've cast on the required amount of stitches, remembering not to include the double loop of your slip knot, rotate your left wrist, bringing the finger yarn underneath the stitches that have been cast onto the needle. So that means twisting it outwards like that. Grab hold of the finger yarn with the fingers of the right hand. That just holds it in place there, like so. This will lock the last thumb yarn loop in place. That's that one there. Otherwise it will just be able to hang off as soon as you let go. And now I can release the hand, letting the thumb yarn hang loosely, making sure that nothing comes out of place and being sure to maintain your hold on that index finger yarn, which is still in the fingers of this hand here. You can now turn the second DPN so the tip is pointing to the right and hold it in your left hand. So literally just switch things over like that. And you can still see I've got my thumb yarn hanging down from the work and my finger yarn is holding that thumb yarn in place, and I'm holding it here in the fingers of my left hand. So now you need to slide the stitches of the first DPN, that's this one down here, get rid of my working yarns out of the way, which is this one down here. Slide the stitches to the other end of it, like that. You can see there, they slide along quite nicely. And at this point you can slip the 2 loops of the slip knot off the end of the DPN, but don't undo the knot just yet, just let it hang there. So I'm going to take these 2 loops and just let them drop off the end of my needle like that. Holding the 2 DPNs parallel to each other, like that, so that the beginning and the end of your cast on meet. You should now have the beginning of the cast on sitting on the needle that is closer to you, that's here, and the end of the cast on, where we finished off, on the needle that is furthest away. Taking great care not to lose any of your cast on loops, hold your yarns in position for working with, making sure that your knit coloured yarn, the one that was your finger yarn or your yarn A, sits to the right of your pearl coloured yarn. So now I'm going to gently and carefully set up my yarns so that I've got my knit coloured yarn, my yarn A, which was my finger yarn, in my right hand, and my pearl coloured yarn, my yarn B, or the one that was my thumb yarn, in my left. This is where you might feel you need an extra pair of hands, but it does work out, I promise. Now you can pick up the needle that you will be working with, and assuming you're going to be starting with standard double knitted brioche rib, bring your pearl coloured yarn to the front of the work, coming between the DPN that is nearest to you and the new working needle. So that means coming to the front there, around the front like that. So now I'm going to work into that stitch which is on the front needle there and knit it with my knit coloured yarn. Work the yarn maneuvers, and then I'm going to purl the next stitch like so. This is the bit that's always a little bit scary and clumsy. There we go, and take my knit coloured yarn to the back of the work. I can carry on in that fashion, working all of the stitches across the front of that DPN there. It feels really fiddly, but it is worth it. The cast on edge that it creates is very, very lovely. You may find it easier to have cast your stitches onto 3 DPNs rather than working in half like I've done here. But once you get a few stitches along it, you can open up these 2 needles into a triangle, and that's what I'm aiming at here. There we are, you see, I've now opened everything up into a triangle, and that's going to make my life a lot easier as I work my way along. By this point, that slip knot probably has undone itself already, and that doesn't matter. You don't need to worry about that anymore. And I'm getting to the point where I come to the end of that first needle. Going towards the end of the first needle is almost as tricky as starting things off, because the 2 halves of your work are almost parallel again. This is always going to be harder with a smaller circumference piece of knitting here. I've only got 20 pairs of stitches. You've probably got a lot more on any project that you're working with. And there we are. I've reached the end of my first DPN, so I can let that one drop. And then I want to just push the stitches on the second DPN, pull out, as just like working with, excuse the camera shake there, just like working with ordinary magic loop, and from here on life is much easier, as you can see. I'll carry on along this side of the piece, and you can join me when I'm done. At the end of that second DPN, you can just let that one drop and turn the work as you normally would for working in magic loop. I've got my yarns a little twisted around there. That's not too much of a problem. Push one needle in, pull one needle out. Pick up my yarns for working in magic loop again in the round. So as you can see, now all of my stitches do have their yarn overs as I've worked the full row into them. You can see I've got this quite long stretchy gap here. That's going to disappear. All I like to do when I come to the beginning of a round when working magic loop is I just open things up a little bit when I put the needle in, like that, enlarging that first stitch there. And then I can do the same with the second one, just giving it a little wiggle like that, easing the you can see already that how that's closed everything up there. So then you can work into the next stitch almost at normal tension, and the fourth stitch with a little bit of a stretch, but not much. And there we are, working in the round. And that's how you work the two colour alternating invisible cast on in the round. Zip!